Welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover Podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King. Everybody, welcome back to the Pregame Pod for Auburn's second game of the season here in Week 2. The second of 5 straight home games to start out the year. They face San Jose State at 6:30 p.m. tonight. You're probably listening to this on Saturday morning. Hopefully, you're listening to it on Saturday morning and or Saturday during the day and not after the game has already happened. 6:30, 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central on ESPN U. And obviously, this is a program we've talked about it all week, but Brian Harsin has a lot of familiarity with. It's a former Mountain West foe. Him and Brent Brennan actually go back to like 2004 when they were both assistants. Harsin at Boise State, Brennan was an assistant at San Jose State. They went up against each other a lot on the recruiting trail. Brent Brennan said this week, and so they've developed a good relationship with one another. So Brian Harsin gets to welcome one of his past foes into his new stomping grounds in Jordan-Hare Stadium. So we welcome in Mr. Jackson Moore, who you guys will remember from the summer. He helped us out and did a great job previewing the Spartans. And Jackson, back then we were doing a lot of speculation, and the season seemed so far away. Then it came out of nowhere. Now we've got some actual data to talk about after 1 week. So I guess just for you, how did it feel getting back into the swing of things? I know San Jose State, like we talked about this summer, is just one of several programs that you cover. So I imagine the first weekend for you was a pretty wild.
Yeah, I got a little lucky. San Jose State and Fresno State, another team I cover, both played on Thursday. And then I got to get out to the Bay Area again on Saturday, and Stanford and Cal played separate enough to me to get to both stadiums. So it was a busy first weekend. I would say San Jose State was probably the result I was the most surprised about. It was definitely a close one against Portland State and got a little scary. But yeah, we'll see. Not what I expected after fall camp, but gives you something to think about where this team is, maybe compared to what we thought all August long.
Yeah, so we'll start there. The game, of course, in reference here, San Jose State beat Portland State in Week 1. Like Jackson mentioned, their game was on a Thursday. It was 21-17. Portland State, I believe, held the lead for most of the game, and it needed a fourth quarter touchdown for the Spartans to pull ahead. A lot of surprising things here. Obviously, besides even the final score, you go into this, Jackson, the biggest thing that stands out to me, the two biggest things, 7 sacks by Portland State in this game. It couldn't have been a fun day for Chevin Cordero, the Hawaii transfer at quarterback. And then I know sacks are included in this. So I'm not exactly looking at the sack adjusted numbers, but 1.7 yards per running attempt against Portland State. Also not what you want to see. So, it depends. Sometimes, sometimes these are one-off games. We've certainly seen that with Auburn in the past. They try their best to lose these random games, and then they'll turn around and beat an SEC West team the next week. So it's not always indicative, of course, of an entire team's body of work. But I guess just how surprised were you by this result, and really on both sides of the ball, what went so wrong in this first game?
Yeah, so I kind of anticipated that this game would be one that would be closer than Spartan fans would like to see, and that might be a slow start. I didn't think it would come anywhere this close to being a disastrous start to the season, but San Jose State only had one practice in fall camp where they were in full pads, and they did not scrimmage. They didn't go live basically, except for one day, and they had a lot of guys dinged up. They were more worried about, I think, getting to the opener healthy than prepared in some ways. And the other thing too is that they're going to play Auburn, and then they're going to get a bye week, and then they've got 10 games in a row. So I kind of feel like they would never say it, but they're probably going to be 1-1 regardless. Why knock each other around for 2 months and get banged up before you play your 10 games that really matter? So having a defense that didn't do much tackling all preseason long, and new position, new players on offense. I think there's a lot on paper that says it's correctable. They've got the players on defense to be really good. They've got skills players on offense to be a really good Mountain West team. But the one that's really a red flag is that offensive line. Not just that they performed poorly, but they did have 3 players that had never played a college snap before. They've got a redshirt freshman at left tackle, 2 more redshirt freshmen at other spots on the O line that they're rolling with this season. And for better or for worse, that was the one spot where they didn't really shore up the lineup, and it's looking like it's pretty costly right now. So I would expect Auburn to terrorize San Jose State with pass rush and to limit the run, much like Portland State did. But I do think you look around to the rest of the team. I think the Spartans are going to be, at least for the majority of the season, pretty competitive if they can just get that O line shored up, which is right now a really big question mark.
It's not often that you see the same problems repeat themselves as terribly in back-to-back weeks in football. But when you're going from that level of competition and heading to SEC country, obviously playing a team in Auburn that didn't have a perfect first game, but still handled business pretty nicely, especially on that defensive side of the ball. That's just one thing. I think that's, like you said, that's probably the biggest red Sharpie. Go ahead and circle it. Is that O line against Auburn's defensive front, because the reality was against Mercer, which actually had a pretty explosive offense for an FCS team, or at least what they showed in the previous week. They didn't cross midfield on their own accord against Auburn's starting defense. They were given field position on that side after interception, and then they didn't cross it again on their own accord until some of the backups started to rotate in. And so when we talked about it in the preview show over the summer, the D-line, I assumed would be the strength of this Auburn team, and it seems after one game that's probably not too far off. Now you predicted when we were talking in the summer that Cordero would be the starter. It seems like that's obviously played out as such. Just the last time Jeff Schmedding in this Auburn defensive staff saw him, they were at Boise State, and he almost led a furious fourth quarter comeback when he was at Hawaii, and almost beat the Broncos in that game. So certainly a really experienced guy, a very veteran player. What does he need to do in this game? And I guess just his first start with this new program this year. What were kind of your takeaways from him in that first game?
Yeah, I was just looking at the stat line early on. I mean, it was pretty on par with what I kind of anticipated with Cordero. I mean, he was moving the ball, his completion and yards were there, and he had a big run as well. All the things we saw in fall camp, but really started to crumble when the O line broke down. And we saw, especially late in the game, he had a couple of passes that I haven't seen him throw. I covered him at Hawaii too. I mean, he had a fourth down pass that looked like it lost him the game. He overthrew his target. They were fortunate to get the ball back and basically move back into scoring position with penalties to win the ball game. So I hope that for San Jose State's sake that's more of an anomaly, that he's going to settle in, and because everything we saw in the spring and the fall said that he was going to be a very explosive player for this team. But you can only do so much when your O-line is performing the way that they did too.
Now, one guy that we mentioned in the previous show was Elijah Cooks. He had a great game for them out wide. If they're gonna have any semblance of success in this game, giving Auburn some fits, which even Mercer was able to. I mean, they got 16 points somehow. They were able to do it kind of in spurts. Who else besides Cordero? Obviously, protect him, make sure he's able to get easy throws. Who else on this offense, I guess, are some players at the skill positions that Auburn fans going into the stadium tonight need to sort of have their eye on and make sure they know?
Yeah, Cooks is the big one. He was a really big player for Nevada the last several years. San Jose State acquired Nevada's receivers coach and about 3 receivers from the Wolfpack in the process. Nevada had Carson Strong, an NFL caliber quarterback, or on the verge of that, and a lot of big weapons, and Cooks was one of them. He had a lot of injury issues, though, so you look at his stat sheet, he doesn't have a lot of big numbers, but he's a big, tall receiver, 6'3", 6'4", just a guy that they're going to throw to regardless of whether he's open or not at times. Aside from him, though, you've got Justin Lockhart, the other Nevada transfer, who was not probably in the top 4 Wolfpack targets at his last program, but he's definitely the number 2 for the Spartans right now. He just exploded in the offseason and really surpassed the returners that San Jose State had. They've got a tight end, Sam Olson, as well. He's missed most of last year with injury. When he's been healthy, he's made some big plays. I'm sure they're going to try to get him involved a little more. And at running back, a position that didn't see a whole lot of success in the opening week, Kyrie Robinson is a guy who was kind of second in the backfield the past several years, and now he's trying to lead that group. And Shamar Garrett it's kind of your special teams, big playmaker that is going to be that number two back and might be able to break a big play if the circumstances are right.
Now, listening to Brennan on Tuesday, they obviously are preparing for Auburn to play both quarterbacks. That's not something Brian Harsin is shying away from. There's honestly no reason to change it from week one. TJ Finley still their starter. Robbie Ashford though is the backup. It's interesting looking back on it. Harsin referenced his time at Boise State, and I'm sure it's something you remember from being around him in that program. Then he wasn't a stranger to playing multiple quarterbacks back then, whether it was because of injury or other circumstances. They would cycle in multiple guys a year on a couple different occasions. So this is not the first time Brennan has seen something like that. But when you're talking about this defense, there is still, I think there's a silver lining and an opportunity for San Jose State, as there's going to be for anybody who plays Auburn in these early weeks of the season. This is not in any way a fully fledged quarterback room for them. I mean, if anything, the backup guy has the more buzz right now. Robbie Ashford. The thought is maybe he could be the starter by the time Penn State rolls around. You had Finley, who looked decent, and then he threw 2 interceptions against an FCS defense. So it's not as if San Jose State is going up against C.J. Stroud in this game. What are some things on defense that you think they could possibly do to make life difficult for one or both of these quarterbacks?
Yeah, their strength is definitely in their front seven. They're probably more of a Mountain West front seven than a Power Five front seven when you look at the size and the measurables. But especially for a 3-4 defense, Cade Hall was the co-Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year for the preseason. His second year running, he won the postseason award in 2020. Junior Fahoko, the other defensive end, all Mountain West pick. Linebacker Kyle Harmon. I mean, they've got 3 of the top front 7 players in the whole conference, but these are not huge, massive athletes. They're probably on the quicker side, and they're not going to overwhelm you with size. It's going to be more with athleticism, which may or may not work in SEC territory, but it usually works in the teams they're used to playing. Probably more so against a less mobile quarterback. Portland State, they didn't get one single sack against the Vikings, and they did have some mobility back there. Their quarterback was able to evade some of that. They do have some size at nose. They have some legitimate, like 6'4", 300-plus kind of guys that are going to eat up space and let the rest of the defense work. In the secondary, they've got some established talent. Trey Jenkins as well, really good at safety. Nehemiah Shelton's like a 6'3", tall, long cornerback who is usually pretty solid in coverage, but probably not quite as well-rounded back there. So overall, this is a defense that's has almost the entire lineup back from 2020 when they went undefeated in the regular season during COVID and won the Mountain West. But they kind of haven't been at the same level since then, despite having all those same players back. They did have one big portal move where they got Chase Williams from USC at safety, and he didn't play the opening week. So kind of negated what we thought might be an impact there.
All right, not asking you to make a score prediction unless you want to, but just kind of your general, thoughts on this game and, how you see things playing out Saturday night, and just if you have one or two more thoughts on what San Jose State would need to do to keep this thing competitive going into the second half. I don't think many people would expect them to win this game. At the same time, it's the same thing we talked about last week when we were previewing Mercer. It's Auburn. You've seen them do this kind of thing before. And look, the last time San Jose State came to Auburn in 2015, it was actually a pretty close game. It only became a 2-score game in the fourth quarter. So I guess just how do you see things playing out Saturday night under the lights in Jordan-Hare?
Yeah, and when the Spartans, very different circumstance, but when they did go to Arkansas in 2019 and won that game, that was kind of the launching point for the expectations that have risen at San Jose State. Was a really struggling program for the longest time. Seems like they've got their feet under them now, even though they took a step back last season. They've still got a lot of the same players that had a lot of success between red shirts and the COVID year. But for me personally, I thought kind of going into this season that they'd be able to put up a fight, but kind of sensing the direction of fall camp, kind of the way that they've taken things slowly and carefully, and especially after the way they played against Portland State, my expectations aren't too high. I think, they're going to give it their best shot, but I don't think they're going to be too disappointed coming back probably 1-1, getting a bye week, and then really doubling down, focusing for the 10-game stretch that they're going to have after the bye week, where there's a lot of coin flip games, a lot of things that are going to decide it. We'll see. Maybe they'll have that kind of chip on their shoulder that some of these Mountain West teams take to places like Auburn, but um, I'm not really sensing that they're going to get that kind of performance in week 2 with the way that fall camp went.
Yeah, as we currently sit right now, I believe it is 22 points would be the current spread, obviously, in favor of Auburn, and seeing a lot of people definitely take that right now. Well, like you said when you talked about at the beginning, the direction that they took in fall camp and some of the things that Brennan did for them in fall camp, I was kind of wondering the reasoning why, and over the course of the show, you've done a good job of explaining, that, like you said, they're okay coming back from this 1-1, making sure everybody's healthy. Like you mentioned, there are some certain personnel deficiencies in this type of a game, and getting onto a Mountain West season where I believe we talked about this over the summer, but the expectation for them is that they can make it back to a bowl, correct?
Definitely. Last season was quite a disappointment, and they still went 5-7, and they were 1 win away from getting there. And especially this year, because the Mountain West is pretty down. San Diego State got taken out by Arizona in their grand opening at their stadium. Boise State got beat up pretty good by Oregon State. There's not a lot of good teams in the conference this year. A lot of them got just demolished by the transfer portal and coaching changes. So the conference is ripe for the picking for the Spartans if they can play well in the big games on their schedule.
Yeah, we've seen it in years past. Teams that play Auburn early in the season, you'll look back. I think it was Kent State a few years ago, had a really good season after Auburn just handled them in one of the opening games. So we of course, after this, we'll be checking back with the Spartans and seeing what they do after their game at Auburn. So wanted to say thank you so much to Jackson for hopping on the show today. Jackson, this is your opportunity now to plug what you've got, and for anybody who is interested in Mountain West football and everything else that you cover over there. Like I mentioned at the beginning, you've got a loaded plate this football season, but I know you enjoy doing it. Tell people where they can get any coverage of that if they'd like to, and what you've got planned for this season.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at JacksonMoore247. I kind of retweet all the coverage there and maybe link to the right place for all the teams I cover. But if you want to check out San Jose State coverage, it's at InsideTheSpartans.com. The other teams I cover include Fresno State. It's BarkBoard.com. Got Stanford at Cardinal247.com, Cal at BearTerritory.net, and Hawaii at WarriorSportsNetwork.com. So if you're ever curious about what's going on with any of those teams, you can check us out on 24/7 Sports there.
You'd be surprised. How far-reaching some of SEC folks is. I guess not only the fan base but some family ties. We had a guy last year say that he grew up. He went to Penn State. He was a diehard Penn State fan, and then he moved to Auburn after graduation, became an Auburn fan. So he became very conflicted in that game last year. So you never know. Does Stanford have a chance against USC? That's supposed to be a pretty big game Saturday night.
I'll say this. Stanford, their biggest issue last year was in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line. I don't know if they've solved that, but they've got probably an NFL quarterback, a couple of NFL receiving targets, and a couple of NFL guys in the secondary. And it's a strength versus strength against USC, who is loaded up on quarterback and receiver and all that. So I would say if there was one top 15 team you want to play at Stanford, they're getting it with USC. I don't know if it'll be close. I don't know if they'll have a chance to win, but the matchup is as good as they can ask for, because if they took on a team that had Caleb Williams and Jordan Addison type athletes on the lines, oh man, I think it would be ugly for the Cardinal. But they got the right strengths to go up against this particular matchup.
Yeah, good deal. It's just not it's not a loaded weekend. You've got Alabama and Texas to start things. That's a high profile game, but I don't think it'll be very close. They got a couple ranked matchups. I think Tennessee and Pitt. So I definitely wanted your take on that one, because that is one of the more intriguing ones.
Check out Fresno State, Oregon State, 10:30.
That's on our pick'em. It's on our pick'em this week.
Both teams are getting votes. Fresno State's supposed to sell it out, and Fresno State is really trying to make a case to get one of those vacant, potentially Pac-12 spots. So they're going to sell things out, and they're going to be rowdy against the Beavers.
There you go. That'll be a good one. Yeah, I like to add games to our pick'em sometimes that are a little bit out of our region and then kind of look 50-50. Just so I can make sure everybody's actually doing their research for it. So yeah, Oregon State beat. I mean, this is a big win for them. Talking about Boise State, they got that. They got the W over them in week 1. So that's a much improved team. So anyway, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Pregame podcast. Thank you so much to Jackson for hopping on. Again, that's at Jackson Moore 24/7, where he is going to have all that stuff. Go ahead and give him a follow for the game as well, because he'll be talking about the Spartans and Auburn, obviously facing off 6:30 p.m. Central Time on ESPNU. If you guys enjoyed it, please leave us a 5-star review. The intro and outro music is by Beats by Mordecai. You guys can follow him on Twitter, SoundCloud, and Instagram. And until the next episode, where me and Jason will react to the game on Sunday morning, we will catch you guys later. Everybody enjoy the game.